Alright, so we're looking at the thorax, and what we've got is basically the whole thoracic region here, or at least most of it, on one model. And we can see a thoracic inlet at the top, or at least most of it. It's not entirely there. But it does give you some idea of the sort of space you've got there, and how at least a few structures here that are travelling in and out. But what we'll do to begin with is have a quick look at some bones. So here we've got a whole assortment of ribs. And what we'll do, and thankfully these ones are numbered, but hopefully at a glance, it's fairly obvious, that's rib 1. So there we're looking at the first rib, and note that it's quite small. And if we compare it to a typical rib, you can hopefully fairly immediately spot the difference. Now, we also have a couple of, well, at least one tiny little one there that's a floating rib. So we've got rib 1, and then a typical rib, and then a floating rib, and then here we've got rib 2. And so notice that it's quite a bit larger than the first rib, but still not as big, and quite a bit more sharp in its curvature than a typical rib. And then again, we have another floating rib here. It's a bit bigger than the other one we've got. But so what we're looking at is, of course, 1 and 2, and then a typical rib, and then 11 and 12 there. Okay, but let's have a look then at the common features, or at least the features of a typical rib. So we'll come back to the atypical ones in a sec. But here we've got a typical rib, and what we're looking at is firstly a head. Now the head is going to be this large bit here. I know that's obvious, and on the head we've got 2 facets here, and then in between there's a crest. Now, just wondering what the best, oh that's not bad, the best angle. So we've got 2 facets, and in between there's a little ridge which is a crest. So if I go like that, you might be able to even see it more clearly. So there we're looking at down on one of the facets, which we can see here, and they're just pointing in slightly different directions with a bit of a ridge in between. So 2 facets, a superior and an inferior facet, and then a crest. And don't forget that the ribs travel inferiorly as they go anteriorly. So this has to be the superior facet, and then this one the inferior one, because here we can see that as we're travelling anteriorly, we're moving inferiorly. And the other reason, what's the other way we can tell actually? What is it? What at a glance tells you what's superior and inferior on this rib? Where the tubercle is. Oh, good thinking. Yeah, the tubercle is going to be pointing kind of inferiorly. So yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah. There's another one that's probably more obvious though. Where the angle is? No. Where the groove is, so the costal grooves, oh sorry, I'm skipping ahead, it's not the next structure on the list, but the costal groove is here, and that's inferior. Okay, so that's always going to be on the inferior aspect of the rib. So at a glance, you can just go, oh yeah, there's the groove. If you're looking at this internal surface, there's the costal groove. This has to be the bottom, this has to be the top, so yeah, you can tell what those ones are. All right, then we've got a neck next to the head. You can see it here on the anterior aspect, but it's probably a little bit easier to spot it if you're looking here kind of posteriorly. You can just see that we've got a head and then a neck and then a tubercle. And the tubercle does have a facet on it, but we're not asking you to identify that separately. So there's an articular part that you can see, and then a non-articular part, but geez, and if my eyesight was better, I would have got that round the right way. So the articular part here, non-articular part here, and the tubercle is that whole bump. Now then, the next bit is the angle, and we can point to that here, but the best way to do it is, of course, to turn the rib over this way, so that you're looking at it either from a superior or inferior point of view, and then you can just go head, neck, tubercle, being the bump, and then the angle, remember, is the steepest part of the curve, so that's going to be just here. So where it's the most concave on the inside and convex on the outside, then that's where the angle is going to be. So just about here. Thank you. Now hopefully the lighting might now be a little better and we can see things perhaps a little better. Okay, So basically, what we've got then is a body. So we've got a body which is most of the, well, basically it's the rest of the rib. So if it's not the head or the neck or the tubercle or the angle, then it's the body. And of course the groove, don't forget though, should stop flipping it around every which way, sorry. The groove is on the body. Well, actually it's on the angle as well, isn't it? But the groove is this inferior part here. So that's, if I can get the pointer in it, that's the costal groove right there. Okay, and is that, oh, and then there's a pit for the costal cartilage, and of course that's at this other end. So away from the head, so that's the pit for the costal cartilage at the other end. All right, so that's a typical rib, and remember that's ribs 3 to 10. So now we've got basically all the other ones here, and hopefully kind of at a glance you can spot those ones. So if we have ribs 1 and 2 here, so 1 and 2, and then 11, 12, I suppose if I was smart, put it around that way, and then a typical one in the middle, and that gives us kind of the full set there of the different types you could get. Now, on a practical exam, there will be a question that says which rib is this, just like there'll be one that says which vertebra is this, and these are kind of your choices. It's going to be 1, 2, 11 or 12 or typical. Now, and if it's 11 or 12, you only have to write floating rib. I mean, you can, if you're sure, I suppose, you can write 11 or 12, but you can just write floating rib or rib 11 and or 12, you know what I mean? You can write both of them down. Okay, I'm not expecting you, if there's only one of them there, to be able to tell the difference between 11 and 12, because if you look at the real skeletons that we have, some of them have a really small ribs, 11 and 12, and some of them have larger ones. So just looking at the size alone is not going to tell you. In theory, rib 11 has a groove, and I guess on this one there is a little bit of a groove there. But anyway, yeah, not one I'm really likely to ask you. Sorry, I'm not expecting you to be able to tell 11 from 12 if they're on their own, but be able to tell me it's a floating rib, that would be fine. All right, then that's pretty much it for ribs, and what we need to look at now is the sternum.